Hey, everybody, welcome back. So excited for this next session, Cindy. Again, I'm Michelle Reba, and I'm here at the University of Michigan and Depression Center, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome Cindy Bjorkquist, who's the Director of Wellbeing for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Cindy's had over 40 years of experience in various roles in the health and well-being industry and has worked directly in healthcare for the past 24 years. So, Cindy, we're very pleased to have you join us. Take it away, please.
And you said my last name perfectly. Can I just say that? That was amazing as I pull my slides up here.
Right, great. And again, anybody who's please put your questions and answers, questions in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have time at the end for.
Okay, so that's not coming over. So what did I do wrong here? Let me stop sharing. Let me do that again. Hold on. Let me do that one more time. Share screen, select and share and go over from beginning. There we go. There we go. Just a little bit of resilience as I start that, right? Absolutely. Okay. All right. So I am so happy to be here today to talk to you about resilience, which is something that can literally change your life. But I do want to point out that I'm the last speaker of the day, and no stress there to keep your attention. Whoops, I think one second. Did the screen go away? Did
we saw it, Cindy.
Share screen, yeah. I don't know, there was some kind of connection issue here. Hold on, let me do it again. Yeah, well, let me just do the whole thing again, because apparently it got lost some kind of connection. Okay, can you see them now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, all right. So I was going to say, as the last speaker of the day today, so I wanted to say a little bit of stress there to keep your attention and your level up, because resilience can literally change your life. And as we weave through this, I want to show you how it actually is something that did change my life. And the moderator, Sagar, this morning kept repeating that he wanted people to take away from this presentation with clear action items and comply them to things that you will learn and use in your life. And I think that is something that I'm going to hopefully do for you today. Now, first, the research is so fascinating that I guarantee that you're going to stay awake during this and you're going to have a real life takeaway. But second, let me give you an example of how this actually applies. I actually think it applies to you, but I think it also applies to, let me see, my screen is doing something very weird. I wonder if I can hit this button up here. If I hit this button, if you can tell me if you can still see it, go ahead. Yep, can you still see it? Can somebody verify they can see it?
Yes, we can see the first slide.
Yeah, the connection is doing something weird. Okay, so I think it applies to you yourself, which is the title of today, but then also your coworkers and your family. Here's an example for you. So I went out to dinner with one of my sons last night. He's like 28. And he said to me, hey, what's your next presentation about? Because we often discuss all the research that I need to produce and host for a weekly webinar show that I do for Blue Cross called Blue Cross Virtual Wellbeing. And I'll tell you about that at the end. Well, we often have meaningful conversations and discussions about the neuroscience and the behaviors that I read about. And when I told him I was going to give a talk today for you all on resilience, for people to learn how to become more resilient or what a resilient person looks like, he actually laughed and he said to me, are you going to tell them about the blinds incident? And I said, well, yes, I actually am. Now, the reason he asked me if I was going to do that is because he knows that I'm what's called a high reactor. And for those people that read some of the research around neuroscience and resilience, I'm a high reactor, which means I react very quickly to emotions with my emotions. And I have to work very hard to become more resilient in my personal life and at work. I've worked years on this. So I thought that was really interesting that my kid actually connected what I was going to talk about today. And he witnesses what I've been doing for the past, I say, about 10 years of my life. Because from my perspective, resilience is one of those well-being topics that sounds so easy to do, right? You hear it in research and you read articles that just handle stress, be flexible, bounce back from stress. But if you look at the neuroscience research and what happens in your brain to make you either less resilient or more resilient, you'll start to understand how complex this all is for some of us, especially people who are high reactors like myself. And you need to understand that it's a learned behavior. So you can unweave that learned behavior by rewiring your brain with some of these techniques. Now, the good news is through the science-based techniques that I'm going to talk about today, that we're going to actually dive into a couple of them to give you some kind of idea how you can rewire your brain to be more resilient if you need to. Not everybody needs this. We all have people in our life that are unshakable by stress, unshakable by adverse events. That's not these people. These people are people like me who need this. I want you to self-evaluate as we go through these. I want you to think about yourself and your perceived resilience that you have. Think of everyday examples from your life, and you will start to realize how you can actually use these techniques going forward. Okay, so are you a high reactor? I'm going to ask you that first right off. That term will make sense in a minute. I'm going to actually explain it, okay? But if you have high expectations for yourself, high expectations for others, and that weaves into your journey, then this information is completely for you. Now, one important point I want you to remember is resilience isn't only, for times of extreme stress, but for everyday stressors. And there are other techniques I am not going to discuss today because I don't have the time, like finding your joy, exposing yourself to nature, eating healthy, getting your physical activity. All those things are in the research, but I only have a limited amount of time today. So let's get going. All right, so what would your resilient self look like? First, I want you to remember that you can rewire your brain to become more resilient. But some people are already resilient due to that personality and how they perceive stress and how their brains have been coded over time with all the things that have happened in their life. You probably know somebody like that, but think about where you are on that continuum. Do you get rattled by adverse things that happen, and do you stay in that pocket of stress? Now, people who are resilient have a higher state of well-being. We know that. That's the connection between resiliency and well-being. And frankly, when you go anywhere and hear anybody talk about well-being, they always throw resilience in there as well, right? But we need to understand what resilience means so we can then answer what your resilient self would look like. So I actually use a psychology definition when I talk about this, and resilience is both a process and an outcome, and sometimes that confuses people, but it'll make sense in a minute, of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging experiences, your ability to be flexible and adjust to things. Now, I added in that definition the words extreme stress, because in that definition, I think there's a continuum of stress where you can use resilience. The people who needed to fix the link that we just went through, they had to have a level of resilience to stay calm and do what they needed to do to fix the link. But if you had something drastic happen to you, you still need to use those same resilience tools. So I added that extreme stress into that psychology definition. That makes more sense to me. Now, what we're going to discuss is a few techniques that if you can implement them, you can make steps to becoming more resilient and be a more resilient self. And you will be able to adapt and control your emotions for better energy allocation. And I'll explain energy allocation in a minute. But the one thing about resilience that I found fascinating in neuroscience is that, and actually this was mentioned earlier about triggers, your resilient self will also be able to identify your triggers, things or situations that could potentially cause you stress. It could be an adverse event or it could be a person. This comes with a heightened self-awareness. Now, when you think about a heightened self-awareness, that's why pretty much every researcher in neuroscience that talks about resilience lists mindfulness as the first step to resilience. That could be just taking a deep breath. That makes me self-aware to know that I'm in front of a trigger. Once your trigger's noticed, then you can implement these techniques that we're going to talk about. So here's an example of a trigger. Last Thursday night, when I went to a big box store and a guy was cutting blinds for my son's house, right? It's for his birthday present. And he said to me, quote, with a wave of his hand, they'll still work, don't work about it. In response to me saying, excuse me, sir, you cut them crooked and they're a 1/4 inch too short. You and I both got on the phone with my son and we needed them to be 21 inches. I actually pointed out to him that they were crooked also in the machine when he was cutting them, and he waved me off and didn't listen to me. Now, I know this is a trigger for me right off the bat, because one of my triggers is a person discounting my thoughts or minimalizing my input when I point something out to them. I know that that's a trigger for me. So I knew that right away I had to put techniques in place to control my emotions when he put the blinds back in the box and started to hand me the box saying, don't worry, they'll still work. That's when I implemented my, I would say the deep breathing technique is the one I selected for that, but I knew that was my trigger. Now, energy allocation for your resilient self, what does that mean? Well, if I didn't allocate my energy to being resilient, that means that I'm not going to stay in that stressful state if I'm a resilient person. You can get out of it very quickly if you do fall into it. So when he put them in the box and handed them to me and waved me off and wasn't listening to me, I could have stayed in that pocket of stress, or I could have got out of it, because it's all about how much allocation of energy that I want to put into this conversation. You quickly find a solution. If you're a very resilient person, you quickly find a solution because you don't want to spend energy and time thinking and talking about why the problem is difficult or unfair to me. A resilient person will come up with a solution, control their emotions, and solve the issue. Now, the fascinating part of this is, according to scientists, your brain, if you're resilient, will actually look different if you're a very resilient self. Therefore, it'll respond differently. And that's the interesting neuroscience that I think is so fascinating every single time I read this. Your resilient self can even get to what's called conflict resilience in the literature. And conflict resilience is that blind, conversation I had with that guy. It's the ability to participate in a very intense conflictive conversation. Now, many of you are saying, Cindy, that's not an intense conflictive conversation when you have somebody cut your blinds crooked, they're too short, and he waves you off, puts them in the box, and sends you on your way, and you want them to be cut correctly. But for me, it is, right? Because I'm a high reactor. That's what I want you guys to think about, is on that continuum of reactivity, where are you? But if I have conflict resilience, I can participate in that conversation, listen, and insert my own perspective with authority still, but with grace and empathy for the other person. And that's also a huge part of your resilient self. Then you'll be able to recover quickly. The recovery time of a resilient person from a stressful situation, high stress, low stress, extreme stress, is very quick. And we'll explain that more in a minute. Okay. So what would your resilient brain look like? Now, this is all from research. Harvard Medical School, 30 times, this is so interesting to me. There's a 30 times higher activity level in the part of your brain that regulates emotional responses and mood. 30 times higher activity. And that's your prefrontal cortex. And on the slide, I put that in blue in there. And you can see in the picture there. This means that you are more in control of your emotional responses and mood. So you have way more activity in that part of your brain. Now, there's also a difference in your resilient brain with connectivity. Your connectivity between the regulating center and the amygdala, you have two, the threat detection centers, determines the level of resilience that you have. The stronger the connection, the more resilient you are. And the fascinating thing about this is that researchers have shown you can grow that connection with practice. So you can get more connection and you can actually become more resilient the more you practice these techniques. Now, remember, you can rewire your brain, become more resilient. I keep saying that time and time again, because I really want people to walk away with that. You can do something if you find the technique that works for you. Okay, so now, I want you, here's a question. I'm using a little color psychology on you because green is going to help you relax and improve your concentration according to science. So think of the last time, take a deep breath, think of the last time, the last difficult or challenging situation you had. Might take you a second, could be extreme, it could be little, could be today for all of you watching that had the link problem. Did you respond or did you react? Now there's a level of respond and reaction with a level of stress. Obviously, But some people who are high reactors, you might tag yourself as a high reactor, you might respond highly, more highly than another person, to something which is medium level stress. But let me use the same example I did in the beginning, the guy cutting the blinds. When he said, with a wave of his hand, they will still work, don't worry about it, back at me, when I pointed out they were crooked and too short, it was a birthday present for my son, for his house, right? So it meant something to me. Here's the difference between reacting or responding. For me personally, reacting, my younger self, before I did all this research and dove into this, would be to give him exactly how I felt emotionally. My emotions would have taken over. Oh, it's for my son. It's for his house. It's a birthday present. Why are you ignoring me? I told you they were crooked when you put him in the machine. I was unheard and very upset with him. You're discounting my words. You don't listen to me. I told you the angle was wrong, but you waved me off. My heart rate would have increased and my emotional self would have taken over. That's reacting. Responding, now that I'm so much into this and I just love this area of research and I'm really trying to improve myself because I'm a work in progress like we all are, would be for me to take a very long deep breath, which I did because that's my technique, make eye contact with him, which you're going to learn later because that increases oxytocin among both of us, and calmly suggest a solution that would lead to a positive outcome. That's a difference. Before I open my mouth emotionally and talk to him, I think about a solution, I think about a positive outcome. What can I say calmly to him, but still have that information going back to him? How do I build that resilience and not reply on my automated emotional response? That's the techniques that we're going to talk about. It took me years to rewire my brain. I'm still not perfect doing this, as my kids will point out, but I've made a lot of effort in this area. So think about your difficult and challenging situation, that example. And again, with that example I gave you, did you react or did you respond? Because your brain dictates how you react or respond. Now, we all have what's called a default setting. And this is information that you need to sit back and think, what's my default setting? Everyone has one. If you respond or react, and the level that it takes you to respond or react to something in your life, a situation or a person. Now, the Latin root on the slide for react is back, to do, to perform. It's quick with its emotions, right? The Latin root for respond is back, answer. And notice the difference. Back to do something, to perform, to go at the person, or respond, back, answer. Think about it, take a breath and answer. I read some articles about a cognitive neuroscientist. Her name was Carolyn Leaf, and she said the greatest quote, and I'm just going to read this. Reacting involves responding to a trigger based on an automatized, often toxic thought pattern that has been embedded in your subconscious mind over time, right? The whole history of your life brings you to what you're a reactor or your responder. And she goes on, and responding means you self-regulate your thoughts and emotions in the moment. That's the key to resilience. You give yourself the skill set and the techniques to self-regulate your thoughts and emotions in the moment, because reactions are often based in the moment and are driven by emotions, right? Often aggressive and fuel disagreement, triggering psychological responses in the body. Like you can actually feel your heart rate go up, you start to sweat. All these things happen in your body when you get into that fight or flight response. So a well thought out action that may result in a positive outcome, that's where you want to get when you respond. And hopefully that makes sense. I put my thoughts and advice on the bottom of that. And basically is that if you're a high reactor and you think that you're like me and you actually have a high expectation for yourself in life and for others, and they fall short sometimes, this kind of information through practice is for you. Okay. I love this bear. For me, it's that sometimes you do want your brain to react, right? You don't always want your brain to respond, not react. What would you do if you ran to this guy in the woods on a walk, which I have done in the UP? You would want your body to react to prepare you for the next move, right? You're either going to run or you're going to play dead, depending on which kind of bear it is. Or another real example is this. At 1 a.m., a guy this summer tried to break into my house. I did not know he had sundowners, Alzheimer's, And all I knew that my phone alerted me, my security camera, a guy was trying to get into my front door. He walked away, called 911, saw the man again. They couldn't find him. All I knew is I thought a guy was trying to break in my house. At 3 a.m., he was back pounding on the glass this time with a tool and trying to break into my house. I called 911. I felt my body react the second time to the stress. And that's a good thing, right? But then I had the choice to be resilient to that level of stress and come out of it, to do rational things, to come out of that reactive state and not stay in that state, because it takes about 6 seconds for your body to dissipate the chemicals that are released when you get into that state. I need to go back to becoming calm and responding to the threat, creating a solution, reacting to the situation was off on the table. I did that, that's great, but not stay in that fight or flight mode, or even worse, go into freeze mode. I enacted these techniques following that 6-second dissipation of chemicals to be able to respond to the situation. So I'm not saying that a resilient self would never react. It's how quickly you can either thwart the react or stay in that pocket of stress. You don't want to stay there. It's how quickly you can get out of that pocket of stress. Now, remember, you have these amygdala, which are 2 small things on each side. And one of the functions is to trigger the response to a dangerous situation. And when those amygdala detect threats like fight, flight, or freeze, they're going to like throw you into that. Cortisol, adrenaline are all released, and they cause an increase in the blood flow of your muscles. You can actually feel your heart rate increase. You might sweat. You have an increase of blood sugar for energy, so you can run right from the bear or the person breaking into your house. Your pupils actually dilate. You can see better. Airways expand. More oxygen you can throw around your body. All good things if there's a bear or a person trying to break into your house. But the problem with today's society is that amygdala sometimes overrides your frontal lobes, which we talked about, at times where there isn't really a threat. And we talk about this resilience because this is also a problem for so many people at the workplace. The problem is when all this happens, when you're in a meeting, when somebody says something to you, when a leader says something to you, when something conflictive happens, and you get triggered. And then there isn't a serious threat for your life, but your body does what's called an amygdala hijack. If you've never heard that in the research, it's really interesting information. Again, it's triggered by stress, fear, anxiety, aggression, and anger. But at the workplace, sometimes people are high reactors, and sometimes that happens. And that's when an amygdala can actually hijack your frontal lobes and say, hey, there's a bear chasing us, when it's really just a person across the table from you who didn't agree with something that you said. Now, the amygdala hijack is a term coined by actually psychologist Daniel Goleman in his 1995 book, Emotional Intelligence. If you've never read it, it's a great book. But it refers to an intense emotional reaction that's out of proportion to the circumstance. We talked about that. So essentially, the rational brain is bypassed and signals are sent straight to the emotional brain. And later, the thinking part of your brain actually says, you know, I processed that information, and why did we react over the top? Like that was not something that should cause that reaction in my body. And that goes back to self-awareness again. If you're mindful, practicing mindfulness, you know, and you're self-aware of what's going on in your body. Now, research from 2016 out of Dartmouth College, Ohio State University, and Indiana State University suggests that there's this inverse relationship between the amygdala, right, the 2 deep in your brain, and the prefrontal cortex, the logical part. So for instance, when the amygdala is activated, the prefrontal cortex is less activated. So when emotions run high and the blood and oxygen flow to that amygdala rather than the prefrontal, then you reduce your ability to think and solve problems. All things that you want people to be able to do at your work site. So this hijack happens when strong emotions like fear and anger and disgust take over that prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain. It's not good for you and your employees, and almost every researcher spoke about mindfulness, just taking a deep breath, all those kinds of things that you can put into place as a quick solution to become more self-aware and prevent that hijack. All right. So what can you do? What are other things that you can do? And this is what the research brings out some stuff recently in the past year that I've read that is just so interesting. And I hope you guys enjoy that. In the moment, when you're in this amygdala hijack and you're like, I think I'm overreacting, your resilient self will be able to recognize physical symptoms of the hijack and know the trigger. Think of the last time that you had extreme stress and what did your body do? You could actually feel your heart rate go up. When that guy was trying to break into my house, I felt my heart rate. I actually probably started sweating, but I felt my heart rate increase. I felt clammy, right? Those are all physical symptoms that you're going to become aware of. Mindful breathing, again, is in every single body of research. Every published article I read, they all point to being mindful breathing to distract your brain. Just taking that deep breath and you focusing on that breath distracts the brain from the hijack. Now, for me, it's one simple deep breath, or what's called a sigh breath. For those of you that are into mindfulness, that sigh audible breath. I'll do that sometimes as well, especially if I'm by myself. But there is a type of mindful meditation also that I want to make you aware of that's really interesting. And we actually have this meditation on our virtual well-being site. And it's a public site that everybody can get into, but it's called tapping. So many of you maybe already already know about this, but tapping is this form of mindful meditation where the person leads you through tapping different meridians on your face. And what that actually does is, through the research, many articles I read on this, that it distracts your brain from the hijack. So if you find yourself in that hijack mode, say you were in a meeting and somebody said something, or you're reacting to something, maybe a project got canceled, your amygdala hijacks, you can actually do that deep breath or this tapping once you learn it yourself, and it'll actually distract your brain from the hijack and go back to that logical prefrontal cortex brain. Isn't it fascinating, interesting science behind that? The other thing I thought was really interesting is naming your emotions. And scientists have found if you name your emotions, you strengthen that neural network between your thoughts and your feelings, right? You can understand what that means. If you strengthen the neural networks between what you're thinking and what you're feeling, then you calm that amygdala by activating that left prefrontal cortex. So you switch, you actually turn the hijack off and you switch it on its head. So if you could say something like, let's take the break-in as an example again. I would say to myself, which I did say to myself, I am scared, but I'm okay. I'm saying it verbally out loud. I'm naming my emotions. Just by naming your emotions, you're calming that amygdala. If you're having a conversation with another person, you could say, I'm upset with you. Just by naming your emotions, you can calm that amygdala down. Now, Bakke and Wilhelm did a fascinating article, and their work was centered around using expressive writing to help process emotions for people who get hijacked, but they have difficulty verbalizing their emotions. So they actually write it down. And this goes back to journaling, which we talk about in well-being all the time. Journal your emotions. So there's another body that if you can't name your emotions out loud, you can journal them, which will help you calm those emotions as well. What that also helps you do, naming your emotions or journaling it, is your brain realizes it's temporary. So for you, sit into a pocket of you're scared or you're upset. If you name your emotions or you write them down, your brain realizes and processes the information that it's only temporary, calming that amygdala response down. Now, there's preventive actions you can take as well. And one of the stuff that's popping out in the research more and more every day is around social buffering. And we talked about the sense of community, and many speakers did in this conference. Social buffering is that you have a core set of friends that you can turn to that can calm your amygdala down. We know in well-being circles that we always talk about having those 5 friends that have your back at 3 a.m., right? People that you can call, and how important that is to reverse the research on social isolation and loneliness. You need 5 core friends in your life for a strong well-being and resilience. But then that also, I found research, if you don't want to talk to a friend and you don't want to talk out loud to them, because there might be some things that you don't want to talk to, then the research on talking out loud to yourself and using your name with that sentence actually does the same thing. This is out of a body of research from U of M and MSU, and they concluded to decrease the emotional response faster and create a psychological distance from the experience, helping to regulate your emotions and calm everything down, I would say my name. Cindy, you are scared. That's my name, right? And my emotion. Cindy, you are scared, but you will be fine. The cops are coming. That's 3 different bodies of research rolled into one. That's fascinating. I think that's fascinating. All right, then we have mindfulness again. But the thing I want to get to you about mindfulness is that it is about self-awareness. It is about taking a breath. You could do mindfulness movement. You could go for a walk. There's many different kinds of mindfulness. But in order for it to be a preventive action, you really do need to practice it every single day because you need to get good at it. The more and more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it. The pausing and the being mindful, being present with your thoughts and feelings, hard to do, right? You need to identify your triggers so you can choose how to respond rather than react. All things that need to be practiced every single day. If you want to practice these, at the end, I have a slide about virtual well-being, and you can actually do our meditations with you. But this is another story on mindfulness. Their brains are actually different, which is fascinating. In a large brain scan study from 2018, researchers from University of Wisconsin and Lyon Neuroscience Research Center discovered that long-term meditators had reduced amygdala activation when they were shown images designed to invoke negative feelings. And then also there's been research around how long do I have to meditate to get the benefits? Some research over there says about 8 weeks of meditation training, and that new participants would actually show decreased amygdala action, but also an increase in that connectivity in their brain. Okay. All right. I threw these in the slide deck for people if you want to see them. Virtual Wellbeing is the show that I produce and co-host, and that's the QR code, but we do have a expanded version on learning the conscious choice of not to respond, not react. And then we also have one coming up, Name Your Emotions to Strengthen Your Brain's Resiliency. So if you want to watch full shows on that, because they have such a limited amount of time today, you can watch those as well. Okay. So let's switch to talk about another technique you can use to build your resilience. This one is again on the green slide. So we're calm, we're concentrating, we're thinking. When was the last time you allowed yourself to do nothing? And I mean do nothing. Doing nothing and letting your mind wander. If you want to be a resilient self, you need to do nothing and let your mind wander. So think about that for a second. When was the last time you did nothing? Not scrolling through social media, not watching TV or anything like that, doing nothing. Actually, there's some research on this. Life is so busy, right? We all on a constant stream of activities and never-ending to-do list. Our brains are always on fire and being activated. If you don't rest your brain, researchers tell us your neurons could malfunction and affect your behavior and impact your performance. That decreases your resilience. So how many times have you apologized to someone for reacting over the top? Oh, I'm really busy. It's an amygdala hijack, actually. I'm so sorry. I'm out of control. Your brain needs downtime, cognitive reset, cognitive rest. We know sleep is important to that. So if I could do another talk, it'd be on sleep. But then also the Dutch use what's called Niksen. And it's really difficult to do if you've never done it before and you're a high reactor or a high personality. But Niksen is you do nothing. You tell your brain you're not going to do nothing. And when your brain wants you to do something when you're doing nothing, you dismiss it. You really just let your mind wander. Now, this picture is my son and his dog doing Niksen, because I'm trying to teach my sons all these things to get through life, right? It's my other son, to do Niksen on a dock. They're doing absolutely nothing. And he's got a high stress job. So I explained to him the value of doing nothing, relaxing your body, relaxing your mind. Now your brain will process information, but you need to let it wander. And that's one thing that employers need to understand about the benefits of Niksen. And you can see on the slide is that those benefits are creativity, productivity, increased energy, all the things that you want for your employees. So if you do choose to do an activity for Niksen, it needs to be monotonous or semi-automatic. You can't be thinking about what you're doing. Some people knit. I can't knit and do Niksen because I have to think about it. I'm not a knitter. I tried it. It didn't work. But I'm going to remind you that the Dutch all these people that do Niksen, Legume, Hugel, if you've never heard of those, they're the most productive and happiest people in the world. So maybe you could introduce this to your workforce. Now, how do you find your Niksen? You have to find it yourself. This picture is my Niksen this winter. I just walked around the ice at sunset for the weekend. So Friday night, Saturday night, just walked. That was my Niksen. I let my mind wander. Every time it went to something, I would shut it off. But that's my Niksen. But I can't tell you what to do for your Niksen. You have to find what your Niksen is. But the key to what you want to find is something that you can do where your mind will wander aimlessly. It just wanders. So find your Niksen. Could be just sitting next to a window with a cup of coffee. Could be anything. All right. If you want to have a full thing about Niksen, you could actually go on to Virtual Wellbeing. There's a QR code. We have a full show on Niksen as well. You could throw that out to your employees if you wanted to. All right, so do you use a negative explanatory style? I know I'm trying to pack a lot in, but there's so much to talk about. So do you use a negative explanatory style or an optimistic explanatory style when faced with an adverse event? Think about that for a second. Resilient people explain adverse events differently in their head to themselves, according to Harvard researchers. People who use negative explanatory styles for adverse events are less likely to be resilient in their life. What do? Some people create more stress for themselves by using negative explanatory styles. Do you explain and dwell on the negative and spend time and energy there? Remember the energy allocation that we talked about? Call your friends, just go on and on about it. Or do you find the optimistic small point and come out of that negative space quickly? Now, again, this doesn't mean that your life's going to be 100% positive. I think an earlier speaker talked about that, and I agreed. But you need to think about what your self-talk is and what you center around, and what do you say to other people at those times of a negative occurrence or an adverse event. Here's an example. Power goes out for weeks for my cousin and his new girlfriend, who live in separate towns. She dwells on the negative for hours on the phone with him, on and on and on. She has a generator, she's fine, but negative, negative, negative. He calls me and sends me pictures about how he's having fun because he's using all of his camping gear. And he calls me laughing with a picture that he's cooking on his deck with his camping stove and snuggling with a Sub-Zero camping sleeping bag. Two completely different reactions. He was confused. It's a new girlfriend for him and he's completely confused. And I explained the negative style to him and he had a conversation with her about it. But one of those people dwelled in the negative forever and ever. And I think it was like 4 days in a row. While my cousin switched quickly to optimism after the initial acknowledgement of the event. I don't have any electricity. We're going on 4 days. But he switched to, I can change the situation. Some people dwell on the negative, but also look for the negative in experiences and actually block that positive from their brain responses. What you want to do for resilience is have an optimistic explanatory style. If you're an optimistic person, explain the negative adverse events in terms of external and temporary. This idea called optimism, it's actually a psychological resilience. Psychological resilience is an interesting thought. It's when your resilient self is using an optimistic response or focusing on optimism. And again, doesn't mean everything is going to be perfect in your life, but can you drag yourself out of that negative style to have optimism in your life and shift the event from internal to external, global to specific, and permanent to temporary? Harvard researchers state if you get stuck in that negative explanatory style for adverse events, you're less likely to be resilient in your life event, right? Now, NIH suggests that we should make efforts to boost our optimism. We hear about that all the time, optimism with well-being, which has been shown to be associated with better ability to cope with challenges and be more resilient. Again, when I had this conversation with one of my sons, this does not mean you don't have negative thoughts or you don't have negative things that happen in your life, but it means you don't let those thoughts control your life. You quickly recover and create a solution.
Cindy,
People,
I wish I was your son. I think he probably gets a lot of great advice from you.
Yeah.
So I think we only have another 5 minutes and there are a
Yeah,
couple of
I'll,
questions. So let me ask you to wrap up maybe.
yep,
if
I
you
will. Yep.
can.
So you quickly recover and create a solution, right? So this psychological resilience. This is like the workforce stuff. And this is stuff that I can do very quickly because it's you and it's on you to do it for yourself, but take it into your workforce. I want you to ask yourself, do your workers know how to be resilient? Do they know all the things that we've been talking about today? This is a picture of the person that co-hosts virtual well-being with me. And, you know, one point is resilient employees tend to be more collaborative. And that's something I'd like you to take away from this as well, besides all the techniques, is that if you feel more connected to other people, they talked about that earlier, you also have an elevated level of trust with other people. Trustful, resilient people roll in together. I'm just going to end with a couple of slides of something I did at Teams building for a company. If you want a resilient workforce that collaborates and can research and reach their maximum potential and build that level of trust, there's things that you can do. There's science around how to foster collaboration and creativity, and one of them is increasing oxytocin among your coworkers, you yourself, but other coworkers. Making eye contact, this was actually also talked about earlier. Making eye contact with other people increases oxytocin levels in an elevator, in a meeting, virtually, over this kind of thing. Make eye contact with other people. Science will tell you it increases oxytocin level of that person. Dopamine and endorphins improve creativity. If you have a team of people and you want them to be creative and productive, we know these two chemical hormones actually improve self-confidence, reduce stress, improve sense of well-being, and makes you feel motivated and focused. I did this presentation for 1,000 people a couple of weeks ago, 500 people in a room, 500 people virtually. And the most feedback I got was the exercise that I'm going to do next, which I would tell you to do at your next staff meeting if you wanted to draw all this information in from what Cleveland Clinic says, which is singing actually produces dopamine and decreases cortisol in the brain. The most recognizable song that you could do for your staff, apparently, when I Googled it, was the Spice Girls, and it was Wannabe. You know the song, right? So, yo, I'll tell you what I really want, that song. Sing that with your team members in a room. The best response I've had in my 36, 37 years of presenting, of people surging with oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphin, feeling together, feeling trusted, feeling like a community. Just my little takeaway for you. This is just bullet points on the talk today that you can have. I want to put those on a slide for you so you can have the benefits, and then also give you this slide, which has the QR code. If you're interested in resilience and all the other topics of well-being, I produce a show every single week, Tuesday for employers, Thursday for people, your employees, for the public, and meditations on Wednesday. They're all open to the public and free for everyone. We have about 60 countries right now that are watching, and the content will change your life. So thank you very much for listening as fast as I can do all those slides. There's just so much work in the science of this that I wanted to put in as much as I could. So I apologize for probably going a little
Cindy,
bit
no
over.
apologies. It was a tour de force and a great presentation. And judging by the questions, people are so interested. We have your email. Would you mind if we gave that
That's
to
fine.
folks so
Yeah,
that they can ask you the questions? And they're going to have the slides, so and they'll have the information of it.
yeah, and my LinkedIn is a very, like Sarah, a very good way to get a hold of me. I don't think you have to put an email into it because my email is jammed. So LinkedIn is another good way. Connect with me and then shoot me something through LinkedIn as well. But either one is fine. But emails are going to get clogged up. So
okay, so LinkedIn is better to reach you.
Either one is fine. Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much for a great presentation. We'll give you now 5 minutes to take a break, and then we'll see you back at 4:40.